Hello, world history students. This is Mr. Everton, and I am going to do a video lecture today on the Russian Revolution. We're going to be talking about, okay, how did Russia become the Soviet Union or the USSR? USSR stands for Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. You don't really need to know that. You just need to know Soviet Union and USSR. And this is a communist country that was really important during the 20th century. Lasted from 1917-ish to 1991-ish and controlled all the land that you see on this map. And it was a communist country. But before it became, the USSR, it was Russia. And we've talked about Russia before, and we've talked about absolute monarchs. And Russia was an example of an absolute monarchy. And what you see here are called Fabergé eggs. They're these incredibly delicate small works of art that are, you can see they're like covered in gold and diamonds and jewels, and they have all these like ornate little statues in them. There's a clock on the one on the left, and these were made by artists for the imperial family of Russia specifically, and then like given by the Tsar, or the leader of Russia, to his family at Easter. So like incredibly expensive, incredibly luxurious items that are, today, like I think you can see one in the Virginia Museum in Richmond. Meanwhile, the Russian peasants, who made up 80% of the population, had a life expectancy of about 40 years. Until 1861, most Russian peasants were what we call serfs, which means that they did not own land. They came with the land and had to work for the nobles who controlled their land. So you can see, Fabergé eggs with the rich people, poor people with no land who die before the age of 40 a lot of the time. So there's a lot of class division here, a lot of class inequality. And we're bringing back the triangles here because we're talking about a revolution. And when we do revolutions, triangles are good. I get that idea from somebody named Emily Glankler. Credit to her. She's a really good teacher. Okay, so the Tsar is an absolute monarch. You can spell Tsar Tsar or Czar. And the last Tsar of Russia, his name was Tsar Nicholas II. And he wasn't very good at running his country. And then, so in our triangle, we've also got the bourgeoisie, that's a fancy French word for middle class. And it's also like kind of a communist term. Like when communists talk about the middle class, like not caring about poor people, they're often referring to the bourgeoisie. And then the peasants are called the proletariat. So the Tsar is living this lavish lifestyle, as European monarchs are typically doing, and he's not industrializing the country very fast, very quickly. Okay, I'm going to move on. In 1904, because the Russians are not industrializing quickly, they are taken by surprise by the Japanese in a conflict called the Russo-Japanese War. Japan actually defeats Russia. We talked about the Meiji Restoration and how Japan had industrialized and modernized their army, and they defeat Russia. And Russia's like completely embarrassed because they're Europeans who lost to an Asian nation, a much smaller Asian nation, and they can't believe it. The Russian people are very upset. In 1905, peasants who are unhappy with the Tsar and want reforms march on his palace in St. Petersburg, and things get out of hand, and the Tsar's troops shoot at the crowd, killing about 1,000 innocent people. This does lead to some reforms and starts to have some checks on the Tsar's power. Like they put in place something basically like a parliament or a legislature called the Duma, but it doesn't have a whole lot of power. So you can just see the main point that I'm trying to get across to you here is that the Tsar people are unhappy with the Tsar, and he's not responding effectively. He's not doing things Tsar Nicholas II is not responding in a way that is inspiring any kind of hope from his people. Poor people in Russia start to cling on to the ideas of Karl Marx, who, remember, is sort of like the founder of communism, who wrote the Communist Manifesto in the middle of the 1800s and was very critical of capitalism and of the ways that capitalism wasn't equal and didn't treat everyone the same and rewarded some people disproportionately, gave them more money than other people. And so these Russian factory workers and peasants start to get interested in Karl Marx, and they start creating political groups, sometimes illegal political groups called Soviets. That word will become important. Okay, so we've got the peasants who are unhappy, the factory workers are unhappy, and now World War I happens, and Russia doesn't manage World War I very well. It's a terrible war for everybody, but Russia is in particular hit pretty hard. The soldiers are unhappy, and it's kind of like there's no more room for the Tsar to continue being in charge at this point. There is in March of 1917, there is the first Russian Revolution, the March Revolution, in which Tsar Nicholas loses like all support and he abdicates the throne. Abdicates means he like gives it up. You can see there's a provisional government now at the top of the pyramid, but the bourgeoisie and the proletariat stay exactly where they were. The provisional government, though, is like it's like trying to sort of like have like a mild reform. They're like trying to like get rid of the Tsar, but keep a lot of the traditional parts of Russian society in place, and that's not good enough for a lot of these angry peasants and factory workers and soldiers. More political groups, Soviets, form. And in October of 1917, like 6 months later, a much more radical version of the Russian Revolution happens. And this is the Communist Revolution, where the Bolsheviks, who are a communist political party, sorry about that, led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrow the provisional government and take over and form a communist government that is leading Russia. And so now you can see Vladimir Lenin there. I can't get Makaya's hilarious joke that he looks like Jamie Foxx in 20 years out of my head. So Lenin tries to really like appeal to everyone by doing this. He does something called his new economic policy, which is where he implements communism, which is like the state takes control of all the businesses and the economy, but he still like cuts out a little loophole for some like smaller businesses to own their own stuff. So it's like all the big stuff is owned by the government, but like if you're an individual farmer, then you can own your own land, which is popular with farmers who like to own their own land. So it's just what you need to know about new economic policy is it's just like kind of like watered down communism, where the government owns operates everything in the economy, but they make allowances for small businesses and farmers to own some of their own stuff. Okay, but oh yes, I forgot about this. And Lenin had, when he comes to power, has this slogan, which is like a masterpiece of marketing, where he offers the people peace, bread, and land. Peace meaning we're going to get out of World War I. Bread meaning I'm going to make sure that you have enough food to eat. And land meaning I'm going to let you own a little bit of land so that you can grow some grain and have some food to eat. I mean, what a peace, bread, and land. Who wouldn't want that guy? Well, I'll tell you who, the White Russians. The White Russians are loyalists to the Tsar, and even though the Tsar and his family were all murdered and dead, they still held out hope that that some kind of a monarchy can be restored. And so there is a 3-year Russian civil war fought between the White Russians and the Red Russians, or the Bolsheviks, and the Reds win. And when they do, Russia becomes the USSR, or Soviet Union. And Lenin dies in 1924 and is replaced by this guy, Joseph Stalin, who's a real piece of work. And we'll talk about him more in later lessons in this class. But for now, let's just say he was a totalitarian dictator, which means he exercised complete control over Soviet Russia, and he implemented mass collectivization, which means he undid the new economic policy. He took away all the land from everyone and started having like communal farming, which didn't go so well and led to widespread famine and the deaths of millions of people. But we'll talk about him another day. Okay, I hope that you got what you needed from this lesson. Yeah, I'll talk to you later.